Hey all. So today we are talking about Spinoza. And with Spinoza, we are beginning our next sort of portion of how we're criticizing the package view. So you recall that on the package view, there's a very particular view of freedom, right? That we are unmoved movers, or that we have a kind of complete freedom. Right? So you remember, for example, Descartes says that our most godlike capacity is our capacity to be free. And that Chisholm describes us as being, like I said, unmoved movers. Right? So what we're going to take a look at this week and next is we're going to look at issues with free will and responsibility. So the first thing I want to do is just give a couple of views about free will, and then we'll launch into Spinoza and his view of free will. So when it comes to questions about free will, the pair of concepts that are typically contrasted are free will and determinism. So what do these mean? Well, determinism turns out to be the easier idea to flesh out. So here it is. To say that an event is determined is to say that if the triggering event occurs, then the determined event occurs. So again, to say that an event is determined is to say that if the triggering event occurs, then the determined or the triggered event will also occur. So for example, I have a little slip of paper here reminding me that I need to make a dentist appointment. Right, I've got the slip of paper. I was going to ask you what happens when I let go, but you're all very clever people, and you know what's going to happen when I let go, right? If I let go, my little reminder to make a dentist appointment is going to fall. Now, when I let go of the piece of paper, right, when I let go of the little slip here, it's going to fall. So letting go is the triggering event, and the falling is the triggered or the determined event. So the way we can put this is to say that the event of my opening my hand determines that the paper will fall. And so another way of putting it is to say that the falling of the paper is a determined event. So we can multiply examples endlessly when it comes to things like gravity or other stuff moving around, right? Any kind of motion. It's easy to describe in terms of the event being determined, right? So again, I have my little light here, and this is the light I have on my bike, and so when I push the buttons here, the lights come on and they flash. So, weird, right? So pushing the button is the determining event. The light coming on is the determined event. So my pushing the light determines that the light will come on. So ordinary examples all over the place. The question is does that apply to human behavior? So now we get to free will. So what do we mean by free will? Well, intuitive, right? So let's go with some intuitive examples. Right now, taking a sip of water. Intuitively, to say that I did that freely is to say that I did it because I wanted to do it, right? It's not like there's a gun to my head forcing me to do it. It's not like God commanded that I did it. It's rather, I did it because I wanted to. That's all there is to it. Little sidebar, that's one very specific view of free will, but it's a nice intuitive one that we're going to work with for right now. We're going to see revisions to that over the next couple of weeks. So, the question is, are we free or are we determined? Now, if you think we're free and not determined, right, so that's free plus not determined, then you're what we call a libertarian about free will, right? So Chisholm is a libertarian, and Descartes is a libertarian. If you think that we are determined and not free, then you are a determinist, or sometimes called a hard determinist. So Spinoza is a hard determinist. Another guy we're going to read, Dirk Pereboom, is a hard determinist. But there's also a big family of views that say that we are both free and determined. So, as we're going to see, Hume is one of these guys. and these guys are called compatibilists, right? Because as the name very cleverly implies, that free will and determinism are compatible, right? So Hume is a compatibilist. P.F. Strawson is another compatibilist that we're going to read. So we have these three options, so these three sorts of families of options, right? You can be libertarians to say that we are free and not determined. You can be a determinist to say that we are determined and we're not free. Or you can be a compatibilist and say, really, we're both. Right? I don't know of anybody off the top of my head who says neither. Well, maybe somebody like Sartre, but maybe not, right? We'll get into that discussion later on. So, as I mentioned, the package view holds the libertarian view, right? That we are free and not determined. And what we find in Spinoza is we find a challenge to that view. We find Spinoza saying, no, we really are determined. There's no such thing as free will. There's no such thing as human freedom. So let's get into discussion of that. So, Spinoza was a contemporary of Descartes, so he's writing right around the same time as Descartes. And I think one good way to read Spinoza, well, I should say one way I have found fruitful to read Spinoza, is to take the idea of a substance very, very seriously. So what do I mean by this? Well, you remember when we were talking about Descartes, I often mentioned physical substance and mental substance. Now, I just sort of threw the term out there, but the word substance is actually kind of a technical term in philosophy. To say that something is a substance is to say that it does not rely on anything else in order to exist. So, another way of thinking about it is that to say that something is a substance is to say that if other things pop out of existence, then the thing that we have identified as a substance won't immediately pop out of existence either. So, examples. My water bottle here, right? Well, my soda bottle that I'm now reusing as a water bottle. That doesn't matter, does it? So, if I pop out of existence, right? If God's like, enough of you, Charlie. Right? So if God sort of demolishes me from existence, my water bottle is unaffected. Right? Samesies. If my water bottle were to suddenly spontaneously combust, I would be unaffected. Right? I would continue existing. Right? Or my big thing of keys right here, right? And hair ties for my kids. Details you may not care about. So my keys here. If I spontaneously combust, keys are totally fine. If my keys spontaneously combust, I'm fine. Right? Good. So, if something isn't a substance, then it is an accident. So, what is an accident? Well, broadly we put it this way. An accident is a modification of a substance, or a way a substance can be. So, examples. So I've got my phone here, right? So right now, you've got my phone. My phone is a substance. We know this because if other things blink out of existence, my phone will continue to exist. But consider the color of my phone. If this phone blinks out of existence, then this black, right, the color of the phone no longer exists. Or consider the phone's mass, right, the mass of Charlie's phone. Once my phone no longer exists, then the mass of the phone no longer exists. Another example, consider my glasses, right? Ooh, that's weird, I don't like that. So my glasses are a substance, again, they exist independently of me, the water bottle, the keys. Again, if everything in the universe were to suddenly spontaneously combust, my glasses could continue to exist. However, the color of my glasses, the shape of my glasses, the properties, the features of my glasses would cease to exist as soon as my glasses cease to exist. So when it comes to people, our bodies are, for Descartes, our bodies are physical substances with various accidents. We have a certain skin tone, we have a certain hair color, we have a certain haircut, we are a certain height, we are a certain weight, we are a certain mass. But we are also mental substances, right? And so what are some accidents, what are some features of ourselves as a mental substance? Well, we have certain beliefs, certain desires, certain emotions. These are properties of us as mental substances. So, Human beings are, on the Cartesian view, are physical substances with various properties, and we are mental substances with various properties, right, or various accidents. So here's the question for you, the sort of the turning question for Spinoza. Where does God fit into this picture? Asterisk, the footnote. You don't have to believe in the Judeo-Christian conception of God to get here. I'll get to that a little bit later on. So where does God fit into this picture? Well, I mean, clearly, God doesn't need anything else in order to exist, right? But on the conception that Descartes endorses, and that theists typically endorse, we rely on God in order to exist. So how does Descartes deal with this? Well, Descartes says, yeah, strictly speaking, God's a substance. God is the only substance. But, basically we're close enough to substances that we can just think about ourselves as substances, right? That basically, yes, God is there, but God's like a foundation. God's like the background, right? God's like the background noise. And we don't need to attend to it in order to think about ourselves as substance, right? So we continue thinking about ourselves as these independently existing entities, with God as kind of like the background radiation enabling all of this. So that's Descartes. Spinoza says, well, not quite, right? If we're going to take the idea of substance seriously, like if we're not just going to say, if we're not going to do all this sort of hand-wavy business and say that God is basically background cosmic radiation, then let's take the idea of substance seriously. So what does it mean to say that a substance is that which can exist without depending on anything else? Like, what does that mean? Well, it means most immediately for us that we aren't substances, right? We're not things in the cosmic scheme of things. So what are we? Well, we are to God as the color of my phone is to my phone. That is to say that we are an accident of God, or the way that Spinoza puts it is, we are a mode of God. So, the key idea to fix in our heads for Spinoza is that there is exactly one substance, and that is God. Right? And everything else is a manifestation of that one substance. Right? He says, just as my phone has certain properties, God has a whole bunch of properties. But Spinoza is a little more specific. He says that we can sort of create this kind of logical hierarchy, right? You've got substance, and a substance has an infinite number of attributes. So what are attributes? Well, they're kind of like categories of properties, right? So for example, with me, right, with my physical substance, there are a number of properties that can be ascribed to me, right? So there are properties about my weight, my height, my mass, and so things like weight, height, and mass, we can say that these are all physical properties, or perhaps we might want to call them spatial properties, right? I guess mass would be the most spatial. Mass and height would be the most spatial, right? So my mass and my height are spatial properties of my physical substance. In the same way, God has, right, the substance God has an attribute of thinking and an attribute of extension. Now, there are also an infinite number of these attributes. Right? But these are the two that we know, so these are the two that we focus on. So we have an attribute of thinking and an attribute of extension. Now, under that attribute of thinking, we find things like will, we find things like belief, we find things like desire, we find things like emotion. Under the attribute of extension, we find modes of shape, of size, of mass, and for each one of these attributes, right? So there are an infinite number of attributes for the one substance, and for every attribute, there's an infinite number of modes. So what does this mean? Well, it means that God is everything there is, was, will be, and could be. So I don't know if this is entirely accurate, entirely accurate reading of Spinoza, because Spinoza is a bit of a slippery fish, as you may have noticed in reading it. But here's how I think about Spinoza. So Perhaps you've heard of the multiverse hypothesis. I think Brian Greene is the guy who's pushing this lately. So the idea is that we have our actual universe, right? And there are an infinite number of ways in which the universe could have turned out. So God is all of those. God is everything that is, everything that's happened in the past, everything that will happen in the future, and everything that could possibly happen, right? God is literally everything. God is reality, right? So a couple of important points here to mention before going further. God is everything. God is reality. Now, God is necessary. So what does it mean to say that God is necessary? Well, it means that God couldn't fail to exist. So in our ordinary way of thinking about things, sort of step out of the Spinoza box for a second. In our ordinary way of thinking about the universe, we can imagine that things were different, right? So right now it's a hot day, so I can imagine today being slightly cooler or slightly warmer, right? I can imagine a universe in which I haven't been born. I can imagine a universe in which this pencil is broken. I can imagine a universe in which my glasses are white instead of black, right? These are all ways that the world could have been, right? So my glasses didn't have to be black. The weather didn't have to be what it is today. I didn't have to be born, right? So these are all contingent things, right? They're things that could have been different. God is not like that. God is not contingent. God could not have failed to exist. In other words, God is a necessary entity. How do we get there? Well, because God is substance, right? God is the one substance. God is the name for the one substance. And it's part of the definition of a substance to exist. So remember how we defined a substance. We said a substance is that which can exist, or that which exists without anything else, without depending on anything else existing. So a substance is, by definition, an existing thing. So God, by definition, by necessity, is an existing thing. So everything is within the scope of God's divine intellect. And since God is everything, God is the cause of all things, right? So everything comes from God. So God conditions everything the way it is, right? Again, God is the one necessary substance, and we are all sort of manifestations of God. And so God makes everything what it is, right? God causes everything. And because God causes everything, and God is necessary, that means that everything that we do is necessary. We could not have been different from how we actually are. We could not act differently from the way we act. We could not think differently from the way that we think. So our thoughts are necessitated. Our actions are necessitated. Everything about us is necessitated. So what does this mean? Well, it means that there is absolutely no such thing as free will, right? Free will is an illusion for Spinoza. How is it an illusion? What does it mean to say that it's an illusion? Well, what it means is that we are ignorant about the causes of why we do what we do, right? To go with a simple example, right? I've got my keys, I let go of my keys fall. We know basically how that works, right? We know all about gravity, we know about masses attracting one another, right? We know how that works. Why am I sitting here right here, right now, saying the things that I'm saying in the way that I'm saying? No fucking clue, right? We have no idea how that works. But, 2 points here. One, just because we don't know how it works doesn't mean it's not necessitated, right? And two, because we don't know how it works, we've deluded ourselves into thinking that we have free will. We're like, oh crap, we don't know how any of this stuff works, well, we must be free. And Spinoza's like, nah bro, that's not how that works. If you don't know how it works, that just means that you don't know how it works, right? You can't let yourself think that there's such a thing as free will simply because you don't know how it works. Okay, so there's no such thing as free will. Again, the fast version of the argument for this, there's only one substance, right? God. That one substance is a necessarily existing entity. Everything flows from that substance necessarily. We are things that flow from that substance, so everything we do is necessary, right? We could not be different from the way we are, right? The universe could not be different from the way that it actually is. Okay, so 2 points I want to make about this. The first involves bringing in a couple of additional concepts about cause. So there are 2 different kinds of causes. Well, actually, depending on which philosopher of science you talk to, there may be lots and lots of kinds of causes, or there may be only one cause, or there actually may be no such thing as causation. We'll deal with all of that later. But there are 2 kinds of causes that we can distinguish. They are efficient cause and final cause. Importantly different. So here's the difference. So here's an example of an efficient cause. Right? So let me bring back the light from my bike. Right? So when I push the button, and the light comes on, and the light flashes, I am the efficient cause of the light coming on. So my finger pushing the button is what brings it about the light is on. Or when I'm going to be very careful here, right? Reorient the camera. I've got my water bottle here. Right? When I tap my water bottle along with my pencil, I'm actually moving it with my hands like this. But when I tap it along with my pencil, we just pretend that my pencil is moving it. The moving pencil is the cause, or my pushing the pencil is the cause of the bottle moving. Why couldn't I just use my hand for that and say, I am the efficient cause of the bottle moving? I don't know. I needed to make it more complicated. You're welcome, friends. So an efficient cause is what we typically think of when we think of a cause. Now, on the other hand, we have what's called a final cause. A final cause. A final cause is the reason for which we do something, right? It's like the end goal, the purpose for why we do the things that we do, right? So why are you listening to this lecture? So that you can learn about Spinoza. So learning about Spinoza is the final cause of your listening to this lecture. Why do you go to Gonzaga? Why do you go to class? Well, in order to graduate. So graduating is the final cause of your going to class. Now, when we ordinarily think about how the world unfolds, or how events in our lives unfold, we often think about them in terms of final causation, right? How many times have you said to yourself, or have you heard friends say, or you've heard on, in movies and TV, that things happen for a reason, right? In fact, I'm fairly certain that that every plot of How I Met Your Mother revolves around this idea that things happen for a reason, right? Now, that view is implicitly endorsing a kind of final cause, right? That things happen for a reason. So, for example, when we get into a car accident, we might console ourselves by thinking, this happened for a reason, right? There's a reason why I got into a car accident. So we ask Spinoza, can we make sense of this idea? And the answer is no. For Spinoza, things don't happen for a reason, right? There is no such thing as final cause. On Spinoza's view, everything flows from God. So that means that God is the efficient cause of everything. And so, it's not that things happen for a reason. Rather, things happen. That's all there is to it. So, here's an analogy that might help illustrate the difference here. Well, actually, 2 analogies, right? Well, one's kind of an analogy, one isn't. I'm just kidding. So, we usually think about God as like presenting us with this end state, right? That there is some goal for humanity or for the universe that God wants to bring about. So, if you're Christian, typically the idea is union with God, right? God wants all of us to exist in union with God in heaven, right? And so what do? Well, we do things like, follow church teachings if you're Catholic, or you follow the Ten Commandments and the two commandments that Jesus gives us in the New Testament. We follow these things, and we will eventually end up in union with God. So union with God is like is the end states, right? That's what we're supposed to do. In fact, if you've ever had a chance to peruse the Baltimore Catechism, if you're Catholic and you're old school, then you'll see that our purpose is to know, love, and serve God, right? So we have a purpose, right? And that purpose is to know, love, and serve God. So that's what's supposed to drive us, right? God acts as a kind of attractive force, bringing us to God. On Spinoza's view, God isn't here at the finish line trying to draw us towards God. Rather, it's more like God is at the starting line, and God just pushes us, and then we just go. Right? And so this brings me to my second analogy. This one's much more of an analogy. I think the first one was an illustration. So here's the analogy. When you get into your car to drive somewhere, your end point is like your final cause, right? Getting to wherever it is you want to go. Right? So why do you get in the car, and why do you drive in some particular direction? You do that in order to get to the place where you want to go. Right? That's typically how we think about God and us. But on Spinoza's view, we just get in the car and we drive. Right? And you just drive and you go, and that's all there is to it. There is no end point, or rather, the end point is whenever you run out of gas. That's it. And so the takeaway for Spinoza is that there's no grand purpose to anybody's life. There's no grand aim for the universe. People are born, they flail around for a while, and then they die. Right? And that's it. If you're lucky, you're born, you flail around, and you flail around in such a way that you create little copies of you that will also flail around for, give or take, 70 years, and then they'll die too. And if they're lucky, they'll flail around in such a way that they produce little copies of them that'll flail around for 70 years or so, and then they'll die. Right? That's all there is. We're born, we flail, we die. So, I mentioned I want to make 2 points, right? So that was the first one, about the flailing. This is the second one. Kind of sounds like a depressing view, right? That we're born, we flail, we die. Right, that there is no purpose. We're not hurtling towards anything. There's no great big plan, right? There's no surprise party for us at the end of the day. There's only death. But, Spinoza says, that's okay, right? We shouldn't want anything more than that. Because as soon as we understand that we are a part of God. And no, that's the wrong way to put it. We aren't a part of God. We are God, right? We are manifestations of God. We are God's way of showing up in the world, right? So just as my phone has a particular way of being with these dimensions and with these colors, God has a particular way of being, right? When I say things, when I do things, that is God acting, right? That is me manifesting God, right? This is a manifestation of God right here. And all of us, we are all manifestations of God. So, in a way, the idea that we're born, we flail, we die, it's not that bad, right? Because it's accepting that we are part of the natural order of the universe, right? We're not special in any way, but that's okay, because nothing is special, right? We are all part of how the universe goes, right? We are all part of the universe, and that's what's important, the fact that we're connected to everything else in reality by being manifestations of God. In fact, Spinoza said that that in which our blessedness resides, right? So our comfort, our hope even, consists in acknowledging that fact, that we are thoroughly determined, and we can sort of cleave ourselves to that fact, and take comfort in the fact that whatever happens, happens, and that's just how things go. There's no testing involved. There's no vengeful God. There's nothing, right? It's just how the world goes, and that's all. So, as a final point, I mentioned before that you don't have to be a theist in order to buy into Spinoza. So Spinoza uses the phrase Deus sive natura. I like to throw out Latin to sound smart. So it's Latin for God or nature, and that nicely encapsulates Spinoza's view here. So we don't have to think about a Judeo-Christian conception of God, right? In fact, if you want to replace God with something like the universe or cosmic force, I mean, knock yourself out, right? As long as we recognize that that there is the one substance, right? There is, in a sense, there is reality. So if you don't like using the word God, you can drop it if you like, and you can replace it with nature. You can replace it with reality. You can replace it with the universe, whatever you want. And so, actually, this is part of what got Spinoza in trouble when he published the Ethics. He talks about God, but he certainly doesn't talk about any typical Judeo-Christian conception of God, right? His God, in a sense, is not a personal God, not even a little bit, right? Spinoza's God isn't even distinct from reality. Spinoza's God exists, and we are manifestations. We are ways of Spinoza's God existing.